Hello, my name is Edwin Rutsch, and I'm the director of the Empathy Center located here in beautiful Santa Barbara, California. The center's mission is to build the empathy movement and to raise the level of empathy in society through education and community building initiatives.
And my name is Anita Nowak. I teach at McGill University, and I'm the author of Purposeful Empathy, a book that invites readers to turn up the volume of empathy in their lives.
And at the beginning of 2024, Anita and I co-hosted the Empathy Summit, brought to you by the Empathy Center, and more than 40 authors of books about empathy participated.
They shared what their book was about, why they were motivated to write it, and what they hope readers will take away. Thank you so much for watching, and we hope you'll buy their book. It is my pleasure now to introduce our last speaker of the day, and then we will do empathy circles, and I really encourage you to stick around for that. Dr. Rebeccah Nelems is a professor of sociology at Athabasca University. She's passionate about transforming society and institutions towards ecocentric and relational ways of being. She's the co-editor of Exploring Empathy, its Propagations, Parameters, and Potentialities. Welcome, Rebeccah.
Thank you so much, Anita. And thank you to you and Edwin, both of you, for all the work you're doing for this incredible summit and for connecting us all in this way. I have slides I'd like to share with my presentation today, so I'm just going to pull those up on the screen. Okay. So my name is Rebeccah Nelems. I'm a social change theorist, a professor with Athabasca University, and a human rights practitioner based in Western Canada, but who works all over the world. And I'm the editor, as Anita mentioned, of Exploring Empathy. And this is the result of an academic collaboration with an international and interdisciplinary network of colleagues hailing from 8 different countries in 5 world regions. But before I dive into speaking about that book, I want to start with the why and tell you about my personal motivation for working on this topic. So I started working in human rights as a student in my early 20s. My parents had been very attuned to world events and had lived around the world. And so despite having grown up middle class in Canada, I was always very aware of how different it was for many people in the world. And I first went to Guatemala to volunteer during the Civil War there. And from there, I quickly found my way into working with various international human rights networks, organizations, including many UN agencies. And the thing that struck me over the years that I spent living in Canada and traveling to work overseas in human rights was how some people out there in the world are literally putting everything on the line, giving up everything they have, sometimes risking their families' lives for people and causes that they've never even met or that they don't know. And then I would often come back to Canada and I would notice that there was many people who seemed really quite disinterested and disengaged in what was happening around the world or in causes that didn't directly impact them or their families. And I was really curious about this. I didn't believe it was a biological thing that some people were capable and some were not of empathy. And I didn't think that some people were just fundamentally good and some were not. But I did get extremely curious about what it was that made some people give up their whole lives for others they had never met, and some people not want to lift a finger or even turn to see it. And as a theorist who's focused on how change happens, I became really focused on trying to understand what is it that makes people shift from one way of being and thinking in the world to that other way of thinking and being. Clear that this is what the world needs more than ever right now. And in 2009, when evaluating a Save the Children program in New Orleans, I found some clues and answers to those questions. I went there to assess a youth gang prevention program, and what I experienced was nothing short of shocking. I watched a group of young people who had been kicked out of every school in the school district. So they were literally going to be denied high school education because there was no school that would take them. This was a group who witnessed, enacted, or were at the receiving end of violence on a daily basis, sometimes multiple times a day. And they represented a number of different warring gangs from different ethnocultural backgrounds. And they were literally transformed by the program. These young people went from being gang leaders to being peacemakers in their communities in 6 weeks. the thing was, the program was only 1 to 2 sessions a week for those 6 weeks, and nothing else had changed in their lives. So my team studied this program. We worked with the participants to try to figure out, we wrote up a study, we had findings, but we really didn't get at the heart of the transformation. And I realized it was empathy. But understanding just what that was and how it happened and how it was fostered became the focus of my PhD research. And I went back into academia. And so as I started to study empathy, I began to see that despite it being such a common, popular concept, it's actually a very vague concept. And it means, as many speakers have been speaking to, it means many different things to many different people. And it has developed over time in different ways to mean different things. And if this was such an important concept, having a vague understanding of what it was and how one might foster it or acquire it was really not good enough. How could we go about fostering, promoting empathy in every country in the world if we don't even know what it is we are fostering precisely? I'd evaluated many programs in the past, and I'd never seen the kind of results that I saw in this program in New Orleans. And what I found from my research is that empathy is a different experience and concept for people depending on their worldview and one's orientation to the world. So I've come to see empathy as an orientation that we have to ourselves, to others in the world, and that there's different orientations that we have in the world. Now, at this distinct moment in the world, I think it's fair to observe, and I am of the belief that we have two very distinct worldviews or ways of thinking and being at play, which, despite being radically different, are coexisting at the moment. An individualistic, egocentric, us-them way of thinking and being, and a deeply relational way of thinking and being that's based in the concept that we're not individuals, but we're inherently connected and relational beings. And this worldview is also deeply ecocentric, seeing our interconnection is not just with people, but also with all of life forms, recognizing I don't even take a single breath right now without a relationship with nature and the more than human. And in this work, I draw a lot from Indigenous theory and Indigenous knowledge systems. And what I came to see is that it wasn't just that the youth gang leaders in New Orleans had lacked in empathy one day and gained it the next. It is that they had shifted from an egocentric, individualistic, us-them way of thinking and being to a deeply relational, interconnected, and ecocentric way of thinking and being. And this led to not only a different kind of empathy, it led to a different experience of empathy in what I observed that enabled the kind of transformative change that these young people experienced. And this led me to creating two different typologies of empathy. This is the first, and it's a distinction between an individualistic form of empathy and a relational form of empathy. So what I call respectively passive empathy and transformative empathy. So in the first of these, passive empathy is what my colleague Gavin Fairburn calls a cozy armchair version of empathy. It's an individualist conception of empathy as an individual skill or trait, where it's believed that it's possible to imagine what it's like to stand in another's shoes. And this form of empathy is necessarily restricted to empathizing with those one feels some proximity or relatability with. And the empathizer is the one who decides who they will extend the empathy to. This form of empathy, imagining what it's like to be in another's shoes, necessarily entails, at least to some degree, a projection of the self onto the other. And it's actually more related to Aristotle's definition of pity, which is care for the other based on fear for the self, based on a line of questioning, what if that happened to me? So, however, most importantly, in doing so, this form of empathy, I argue, doesn't actually need the other to be there as an individualist definition. Indeed, how could they be there if you're standing in their shoes? In contrast, a transformative empathy has a very different starting point. This form of empathy is based on the concept that we're not discrete individuals, but we're inherently relational beings, interconnected no matter how distant we might seem. And this form of empathy doesn't believe it's possible to ever stand fully in another's shoes, but that one can engage in deep listening, witnessing the other whilst withholding judgment. And as such, it's an ongoing, unending process of orienting and relating and opening up to the other, of being led by the foreign, as Edith Stein writes about it so many years ago. And this type of empathy, as its starting point, is a self-reflection and looking at one's own shoes, and then striving to understand how one's own shoes are connected to the shoes of the other. And so when I kept going back to the experience of the youth in New Orleans, I kept seeing that this is the shift that seemed to happen to them. And I think one really interesting thing to notice about it was how it was a shift of an orientation, and it was more like a shift, a turning of the gaze. It was sort of an instantaneous thing, which really has led me into a line of work I'm doing now, which is to explore how this shift of orientation is already always available to every being. And is not sort of necessarily like a lengthy process of rational, training necessarily. So for me, this transformative empathy opens up the possibility of empathizing with the very distant other, including the more than human and nature, and that this kind of empathy is a kind that transforms not just the empathizee potentially, but also fundamentally the empathizer. And opening up new pathways and unlearning and unknowing of the empathizer. And I truly believe that this is the kind of empathy that we're often referring to and talking about when we talk about the importance of empathy in the world. So based on this, I also wanted to engage with all of the incredible academic work that's being done on empathy and relate this typology to some of those. Because I think they bring in some really different important categories of thinking, such as cognitive and affective, etc. So I developed this next typology that presents empathy as not a single stable concept or definition, but actually a constellation of ideas that's changed over time, and that these are many definitions that coexist. And what I hope readers might take away from this and the book is that it's really important for us to think about and consider, as we strive to promote empathy in the world, what it is exactly we're meaning and speaking about when we speak about empathy. So this typology is in my book, and I won't take too much time here to talk about it due to time restrictions. But I'll just move on to share that this book is actually a collaborative academic publication, and I had the honor of co-publishing it along with authors and thinkers and activists from 8 different countries in 5 world regions, and that these different thinkers actually hail from 8 different disciplines, including media, literature, health, sociology, English, arts, psychology. And we met 2 times at the global conferences on empathy, where we each discussed our ideas. And so reflective of my case for a transformative relational empathy, I think this is a real strength of this book, that it is itself the result of a relational process of engagement. So I welcome you or any of the other individuals watching to stay in touch, and I look forward to following up and being in touch with many of you. I've really enjoyed the presentations today immensely, and I'm excited to connect with many of you to hopefully continue conversations. So my contact information is here, and I look forward to seeing what's next with the Empathy Center. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebeccah.